Hello. Hi,
Hello, Vicky.
Witty. So I'm Elisa.
Elisa,
I'm
is
the
my
one who
voice
sent
clear?
you. Yes. Okay.
Okay.
So for the first presentation will be from Andrew, right? Or from Anand? I forgot.
From Anand.
Anand, then
Anand,
Andrew,
Andrew,
and
and
then
Vicky, and then Elisa.
yeah, I just give like very short feedback. No, I just give three events. So how's Bangkok? I'm pretty sure there is no more COVID, right? But you still have a lot of demonstration.
Yeah, the demonstrations are now slowing down a bit, and what's shocking is that I think on 19th December, just a few days ago, we found 500 cases of COVID, like suddenly. Like if you look at the graph, it's become like we
Ah,
are
okay.
we it's quite shocking because we thought we are very safe, we are very pleasant, and then
Hmm.
suddenly it skyrocketed to 500 cases.
Okay. Oh, we are 4 p.m. already. So
I cannot
Dian,
hear
what
you.
you
Wait,
would you like to
let
say?
me disable my Bluetooth and then I hope it's better.
Yeah. Okay. We just mm, submit.
Okay.
We
Hello?
can start now. Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you, Vicky. So according to the schedule, we still have 5 more minutes for the registrations of participants. Should we wait for another 5 minutes, or do you want me to start now?
5 more minutes.
Okay.
Fine.
Ian, are you done with your field work?
Almost, but I will start writing from here while I'm teaching for the winter from here.
Ah,
Yeah, still a
so
long
you'll be
way.
done in a year's time from now?
I hope. Hopefully.
Ian, you're muted.
Yeah. I'm just preparing for the. I'm talking to other organizers here.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, it's 1 more minute, but I think we can at least start with. I can start the event for this afternoon. So, do you want to start live now? Okay. So, good afternoon. Thank you so much for attending this webinar or discussion through Zoom this afternoon. Today, we will talk about understanding pandemic crisis in the southern cities. And we will have 4 speakers from different cities in the global south. And we will have this discussion until 6 p.m. today, so for the next 2 hours. So my name is Diantre Rawati. I'm from Rujak Center for Urban Studies and currently also a PhD candidate from UCLA. And so today we will discuss focusedly about how we can understand the pandemic better in terms to be able to respond it better. But before we respond or make any plan, perhaps we can maybe we can understand it better through these different cities. So I would just read the term of reference from the organizer. So the COVID-19 pandemic has brought crises, challenges, and changes to cities and urban life, especially cities in the global south. The crisis also deepened due to pre-existing conditions of certain cities, such as socioeconomic inequality, racial and class divide, housing and work precariousness. However, the pandemic responses from the authorities sometimes detach from the reality, and other times it also serves as a continuation of an everyday vulnerability that happened before pandemic. Cities are tempted and sometimes forced to think what the future will be like after the pandemic. I think we can see in most of the webinars discuss how what should we do? How should we respond to this pandemic in a city scale, in a much better response, blah, blah, blah. But I think the discussions today is how through the pandemic and through discussions today, we can use this moment to perhaps learn whether we can create a possibility of radical change. But before that, we might want to step back, or we want to step further to read and understand what actually happening in these global south cities. So today we have Lagos, we have Bangkok, we have Hyderabad, and then we have Jakarta as the host of the discussion today. So I will explain about the plan of the discussion today. We have first 4 speakers. We have Anand Maringati. He is the Executive Director of Hyderabad Urban Lab. And we have Andrew Mackey. Andrew Mackey currently is in Vancouver, but he's co-director at Justice and Empowerment Initiative from Lagos. And the third speakers, we will have Witi Wisum Tumporn from as a coordinator of CAN, or Community Architects Network, based in Bangkok. And the fourth speakers, who also will respond for the previous speakers, is Elisa Stanujaya as an acting executive director, and not acting, I mean as an executive director of Rujak Center for Urban Studies, the host of the event today. So we will start. I will explain the schedule today. First, the speakers will talk for 20 minutes. We will have a timekeeper that will remind you before, except 5 minutes before your times end. And afterwards, we will have Elisa, 15 minutes to respond to all these 3 speakers. And then we will also have discussion for the last 30 minutes of our Zoom discussion today. To help the audience, we have Chris as our translators that will help you for the Indonesian participants if you need the translations, you can go to the chat box where the organizers already write down how to access this translation. So before we can rather than hear me rambling and then talk nonsense, maybe we can start with Anand Maringati from Hyderabad. Time is yours.
To begin to ramble. Thank you. All right. So thank you very much, Elisa and Deandre and the other speakers. A big thanks for Chris, who's going to be translating into Bahasa, which I won't understand, but I'm sure we will be able to communicate. Before I start, I want to make place a few caveats. I think one of the important things that we have come to understand in the context of COVID is that a number of conceptual frameworks and categories that we have been working with and have always kind of suspected that there's something not quite right about them have basically broken down. And I think that breakdown, that collapse, is an important moment because it hasn't given us anything in its place. And I say this because one of the most important things that we have realized is that this is a moment for practice, not so much for a moment for theorizing. And that essentially means that you grow up, you go on a hunch, you try, you experiment, you create new formations that you don't that you have not known in the past. So what I'm going to be doing, therefore, is to set out a few provocations as quickly as I can, so that we can all collectively reflect on that, and hopefully the provocations that I'm going to set out are going to be meaningful for other people in other locations also to think through. So let me begin with how this whole business began for us in Hyderabad city by first telling you what the city is all about. Hyderabad city is kind of bang in the middle of India. It's like the center of gravity of the country. It's landlocked. It's about 400 years old, maybe a little bit older than that. And you can literally see the built environment of 400 years ago in one big part of the city. So you can see monuments and houses and open spaces and graveyards of that period. From that, you look at the new built environment that has come up now, which is very, very tightly integrated with Riverside, California, with Silicon Valley, with New York, providing IT services. And that landscape is merging with, interspersing with this older landscape. Now, all of this built environment is actually sitting on top of an agrarian landscape, which is very, very unique. It's unique in the sense that it's a very uneven terrain. It's a plateau. It's about 600 meters above sea level in many places, but it's extremely uneven. And that unevenness essentially means that the drainage pattern here is very, very complicated. So if you take any single square kilometer area in the city, you will find a lake in the middle of it. And all of these lakes are interconnected. They form a very complex chain of water that finally empties into a river. On top of that landscape, we have now built a very, very complex cityscape. So it doesn't have one single urban center. Its center is scattered. It's very, very polycentric. On the west side is where one assumes is all the high-tech area. On the south side is where you assume all the older part of the city is, and that simply has to do with real estate, right? The older part, which was built 400 years ago, was already overpopulated. So people moved towards the north and towards the west. Wherever land was freely available, that's where the growth happens. What happened in March when we first heard about the possibility of a long-term lockdown? To be honest, none of us had any idea about how long this was going to be. And that was the most important thing about that lockdown moment, that we knew that something bad was happening. We didn't know how bad it was and how long it was going to be. 1 month, 2 months, 1 year, 2 years, nobody had any clue. We didn't know how badly the lockdown was going to be. That is, how many things were going to be locked down. The assumption, the message that came to all of us was that you should all stay at home because home is the safest place. And this is my first provocation. For a large number of people, the home is actually not the built unit of so many square feet in which you are living. It's the entire neighborhood, because people live in extremely congested houses in cities. In some places, you have a room of 8 feet by 10 feet in which there are 8 people living, and sharing that space. So for them, the house or home is not that room, it's that entire neighborhood in which they spend most of their time. So this was one of our biggest things that broke in the beginning of March, towards the end of March, which is when the temperatures were supposed to go up. Luckily, we didn't have a very bad summer. It was not that hot. Otherwise, we would have actually had more people dying because of heat waves than because of COVID. Right? The second thing that happens is this is a city in which you have 800,000 migrant workers, and these are not regular migrant workers who would be coming to a city and staying there for a long time. These are people who are seasonal migrants. That is, they're here for a few months and then go back. They're circular migrants. That is, their home is somewhere in the village. They come to the city to work for a few months and then go back. And their going back month is always around June, July, August, when the rains begin, which is the time when the agricultural operations will begin. Now, most of them are in construction work. And at the beginning of April, when the heat begins to pick up, that's a good time to cure cement. And so construction work actually picks up and everything was shut down. Now, this means that 800,000 workers are now unsure of how long they will have any work, when work will resume, and they know that in 2 months' time they should anyway be back home, right? And without work, they're all people who are earning on a day-to-day basis, on a weekly basis. They don't have money and they don't have any way to get out of their houses because the lockdown is supposed to confine you all the way back into the doors of your house. You're not supposed to step out at all. So that means that you don't know where to go to look for food. You don't know how to reach for it. And because these are not registered anywhere, we also don't know where they are. This 800,000 figure that we are talking about is something that came up after several weeks of struggling to find out exactly how many people are there in the city. Now, you have the logistics of supplying them food, cooked food, dry rations so that they can cook at home. And to cook at home, they need fuel. Many of them don't have fuels and stoves because they are supposed to eat on the streets. Now, all of these people, once they begin to suspect that work is not going to resume very soon, they begin to actually plan on going back home. Now, with all of public transportation shut down completely, these workers literally start walking back home. And that walking back home, we are not talking about anything like 200 or 300 miles. We're talking about very often 500 miles was the minimum that they were walking. In some cases, it was 1,000 miles. And this walking without any navigational aids, many of them didn't know how to use Google Maps, was very complicated because they knew that there were some national highways, they knew that there were some national railway lines that they could follow to reach somewhere close to their homes. And this exodus from the city was again something that completely shook all of us because nobody knew how to reach them safely to their homes. We couldn't persuade them to stay back at home in the city. And therefore, all that could be done was to create networks of support all along the routes so that we can track the workers where they are, supply them with food, make sure that they're safe and secure. Now, what will this really mean? It basically challenges us to think about what kind of work do people have, what does work itself mean, and what is a permanent place of residence. Most importantly, the issue was that in a country where a lot of your basic entitlements are tied to the province in which you're born, in which you're supposed to be a permanent resident, migrant workers have practically no rights at all in the places where they're working. And that essentially means then that for us to provide any kind of services to them, for us to provide any kind of support to them, we had to entirely depend on charity. The governments did provide something, but not as a matter of entitlement. And because many of these work arrangements are very informal and they don't get registered properly, In many cases, employers actually abandoned these workers. And so the abandonment by employers of workers was one big challenge that we had to think through. So then the bigger question that comes up again for us as a provocation was the whole question of how do we think about social security in a situation like this? Then moving beyond this, we had begun to look at very specific social groups, women, children, elderly people, what is happening in households. And we found that some very, very disturbing problems were emerging. For example, in many houses where there is no income, you're entirely dependent on charity that is being offered by somebody or the other, or by some basic subsistence type aid that was coming from the governments. People had to figure out the trade-offs. Are you going to put some food on the table for the children, or are you going to buy medicines for the elderly people in the house? What do you do when your private clinics or doctors refuse to see patients in the clinics because they're themselves actually aging doctors and they are scared to talk to people? We had to invent new types of telemedicine, advising online, all of that, which works to some extent in dealing with anxieties, in dealing with smaller problems. But for a large extent, the burden of not having been diagnosed and tested and treated during these long months resulted in sudden deaths for a lot of people. And that was again something that we were very, very puzzled by, because what seemed to be emerging is that there were all kinds of new ways to die that one was not even able to predict anymore. And then moving beyond that, we had problems of how do you deal with the dead bodies when there is fear of contamination? Who takes control of it? Should this be done by volunteers? Should this be done by trained workforce? And working out all of this again meant that every single bit of this was to be an experiment. Now, as we were working through all of this, one big challenge that came up for many of us was the whole problem of what was again happening inside the households. The problem of what do you do when people who are supposed to be normally at work somewhere else from home are also at home 24 hours? Does this lead to domestic violence? Does this lead to domestic discord? Does this lead to increased work for women? Does this lead to reduced work for women because there are men at home now to do the work? The answers were very complex. In some places it is this way, in some places it is that way, and we were never really able to pull it all together to make any sense of what was happening. Now, putting it all together, if I have to try and articulate a set of questions that we need to think about going forward, about what does the pandemic teach us, what does COVID-19 teach us, uh, my answer would be that we need to think very seriously about the old binaries, the boundaries that we had known. That is, what exactly constitutes a home, what exactly constitutes a neighborhood, what constitutes the strict boundary between agriculture and non-agricultural work. And because for so many of the migrant workers, these are the urban workers, but they are part of a farming household. And if they don't come back to the city, farming cannot happen. And if farming doesn't happen there, we don't have food. So we need to figure out how to rework these connections and make sure that everybody is secure in the different places where they are. As we are working through, conceptually, one big issue that we need to think about is, of course, the problem of what exactly does household work mean? What does it mean to think about care work? Who are these workers? What is the workload? How is this to be redistributed across genders, across difficult, complex locations? Who are the vulnerable populations, and how do we take care of all of them? For example, one of the interesting things that has happened is that many different vulnerable groups were actually reached out to by the civil society groups, who were able to document, who were able to reach out to them, who were able to reach supplies. But a lot of the work that has happened in these last 8 months seems to have happened in a very um, conjunctural manner. Right? the sense that it happened because of a number of factors coming together in a particular combination in the face of an emergency. Whether or not we will be able to hold on to those lessons, whether or not we will be able to take it anywhere further beyond this, we don't know. What we do know is that some of the formations that have come up are really spending a lot of time right now going over all of our old documentation, the social media archives that have been created, trying to interview each other, put together the notes so that we can think about where we can go forward. And this is happening bang in the middle of all kinds of other crises and all kinds of other processes. And this is the other puzzling aspect of COVID-19, which is that all the way through, it was as if governments or some part of our everyday life was already fixed. It was going on as if nothing had changed. The cycles of capital turnaround in those sectors did not change very much. For example, big construction continued, big infrastructure creation continued. Um, what does all of this mean? Does this mean for us that all of the tweakings of laws, all of the changes that have happened, in the absence of any kind of discussion, debate, deliberation, um, are they going to remain forever? Will we be able to rethink them? It's all very, very unclear. And that is the context in which we are seeing now a very large number of protests happening across the country. Some of it is about changed employment codes. For example, in some places, employment codes have been changed to permit 12-hour work days, much more relaxed contract rules. We are seeing opening up of doors for easy entry of markets, particularly monopoly type markets, players into certain segments of the economy. Whether all of this will be reviewed, whether we will be able to push back, that's all very unclear. But what we do know is that there is enough consciousness, and therefore we are seeing all kinds of new protests and protest forms that are coming up. One of the most energizing things of all of this is that because people were not able to meet with each other, a lot of social media activism has grown in the last 8 months, and that also brought in a large number of technically proficient, technically capable, competent volunteers into the field. That means that we have now capacities to produce maps very quickly. That means that we have the capacity to do data visualization and analysis. That means that we are able to capture a lot of data even as it comes out into social medias and look at the trends and analyze them. So it looks like we do have, on the one hand, a tremendous possibility for change, or even consolidating and building on the gains that we have made. And on the other hand, it does look like we do have a slightly depressing scenario because we don't really know how much of this learning can be held on to by us for how long. So I'll stop here, and hopefully we'll be able to think and talk about some of these. Thank you.
Okay, Anand, thank you so much. Actually, still have 2 more minutes, but that's a good wrap up. It's really interesting about your sharing on the situations in Hyderabad, and probably also reflecting on what happens in India today. I think there are so many. I can start with provocations, but also the new terms. How could we understand it or rework these boundaries? Because in order to respond, in order to act, and to really understand these binaries and how to approach or to intervene in a much better strategies, but also the political economy situations of, I think it's quite similar with what happened in Indonesia. I think Elisa will explain perhaps also what happens here with this market, more proto markets, estate that proto markets, and also I think Andrew maybe can elaborate more on your provocations about how we can also capture this moment, right? Recording these moments and make sure that the lesson learned that we had, the response, the strategies, but also to understand what actually happens and what is the limitation, what are the current issues can be resolved through this the documentation. Not can be resolved, but we can start by at least having a good analysis of what happens today, and it will be help through this documentation and recording of what we have today. So I think I will continue this provocation from Anand to Andrew Mackey from Justice and Empowerment Initiatives. And I've heard from Elisa that you also have so many initiatives in responding of this pandemic in Lagos with through your organization. Maybe you can also share with us, and then also response to provocation from Anand. Andrew, time is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dian. And thank you everyone else for being here today for this really interesting conversation about taking lessons from our experiences of pandemic and social activism. My name is Andrew Mackey, as introduced. I'm co-director of a small organization based in Lagos, Nigeria, called Justice and Empowerment Initiatives. And we are a human rights NGO, and we support a grassroots network of residents of informal settlements, both in Lagos and also in Port Harcourt, and also over the border in the Republic of Benin in Cotonou. I'm actually a lawyer by training, but we are urban planners and creative media specialists and architects and others. So that's where we're coming from, very much from not an academic background, but a community-based background. And what I'm going to share is first a little bit, following Anand's lead, a little bit about the context of Lagos, and I'll show some images just so that all of us have some of that in mind, because when I then transition to talk about two of the efforts that we undertook in the moment of lockdown and thereafter in response to the onset of coronavirus, it's really important to have that context in mind to understand the push and pull factors that led us to where we were. So if I can manage to share my screen, I'll pull up some images. Aha. Okay. Great. And let's see.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Wonderful. And I should be able to. Aha. Good. So again, I'll try to go through this context bit somewhat quickly, but I think it's an important starting point. Informality, criminalization, and collective action, which are through threads of all of our work and where we live and operate. Yeah, a few notes. Nigeria is a very big place. 187 million people, probably more than that at this point, and tremendous poverty. The vast majority of Nigerians, including in the urban context. This is an image of one of the informal settlements that is most well known in Lagos, called Makoko. As you can see, it's a settlement that's predominantly on top of water. Lagos is a city of 23 million people. It's a bit disputed. There hasn't been a very reliable census in many years. And it's rapidly growing, rapidly urbanizing, without any new land to settle. It's a city mostly built on water, between creeks, on islands. And the consequence is that the vast majority of the population, some 67% of the urban residents, live in settlements like what's depicted here, which are characterized by informality, lack of access to basic services, lack of security of tenure, incredible informal economy, which I'll mention a bit about shortly. So I'll I'll kind of give a snapshot of three dimensions: housing, livelihoods, and basic services, which I think really set the scenes. So first, a few notes on housing. Here you're looking at an image of houses primarily built of palm frond and wood in a community formerly now demolished community, but called Otodobame in Lagos, in one of the most affluent areas of Lagos, where there's great disparity. These houses, as you can tell, are very informal, mostly located on the waterfronts, and primarily built with very, very simple and often traditional materials, a mix of materials. Again, Lagos is a city of great extremes, as are many of our cities in the south. As you can see here, informal settlement built with wood and tarpaulin, as against one of the bigger business districts just behind it. This is an image of a young man who, or actually an elderly man who was evicted from his home in Badia East. And what the reason why I brought this image in is I think it shows very clearly the evolution of housing. As you can see, he's presently living in something of a makeshift house with cardboard and tarpaulin. And over his head, he has built the frame for his new house, which will be built with wood and zinc. And then maybe thereafter, in years to come, he could graduate to something like what you're seeing here, which would be the most permanent of structures built with block by hand in informal settlements. The last note on housing I'll mention is, of course, the destructive force of forced evictions. 2020 alone saw evictions of over 20 communities in Lagos. It's a constant part of the urban life and urban fabric in Nigeria. This cycle of demolition and rebuilding and demolition and rebuilding, and very much drives the real and perceived insecurity of tenure of people who live in Lagos, that in fact a bulldozer might arrive in the middle of the night, might arrive tomorrow. And so there's a lot of hesitancy to invest, both at the household or community level, but also on the part of development partners, building infrastructure and providing other services, because even those services could meet their demise at the teeth of a bulldozer. Jumping forward to talk about livelihoods, and probably none of this will be much of a surprise given all the images that you just saw of the housing and community circumstances, but the livelihoods of the urban majority, of course, are very informal and small scale. Petty trading and the service economy. And one of the through threads here that's quite important, and I'll pick up again in the context of COVID-19 and the government's responses, is an increasing criminalization of poverty and criminalization of informal livelihoods. Standard, typical provision shop, selling all the things that you might need on a daily basis, and you'll see red X in the middle of the screen, marked for demolition by the Ministry of Environment, because this building was on a setback intended for drainage or something of that sort. Now, what you'll see if you walk through informal settlements and informal markets is, in fact, these kinds of red X's and marks proliferate. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a bulldozer tomorrow. It's part of the state's sort of machinery to ensure that that people continue to live precariously, continue to live with this constant, threat or reminder that in fact what they're doing is illegal. Of course, much of the informal economy also exists alongside other infrastructure. Here is an image of a railway and people selling along it. Same is true along major roads, and here's an image of hawking. Again, probably not surprising images, but important to show the context. This is how people make their living. This is how people eat on a daily basis. And I mentioned criminalization, and this is one of the, of course, most concerning trends, particularly from perspective of a human rights lawyer. Over the last years, Lagos State has invested tremendously in a mobile court system, which is a series of rather informal courts that prosecute petty offenses. But among the petty offenses that they prosecute are a number of vagrancy offenses that aren't actually constitutional in Nigeria, but are nonetheless prosecuted. And so here's an image of 4 women who are begging. Begging is illegal, and arrested and executed and put into detention on consequence. So the third through thread, and before I jump to our work in response to COVID, is basic services, which, as all of us know very well, are deficiencies thereof were highlighted in the context of COVID in particular. This is an image of, if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, 2 water pipes passing through a community that this isn't a refuse dump. This is actually a community that brought in refuse to fill the land that otherwise was water. So basic services are very informal. They're also increasingly privatized. The Lagos state government has made a big push over recent years to basically trade off its responsibilities to provide waste collection to an international company, to provide water provision to various private water providers, and so on. And the consequence of this, of course, is that those more formal services rarely reach the informal communities because of various challenges with connections and payment mechanisms and whatnot. And therefore, people living in informal settlements effectively are paying more for these basic services, something that we call the poverty penalty. You pay more for a liter of water than someone in an affluent community would. This is a water cart. Of course, this is how most people get their water. Drainage is quite limited. This is an example of a community-built drain. There are very few government investments in these communities, and where many communities are on the waterfronts or along canals, drainage is a huge issue. And this is just an example of one of the government investments that came to a community called Daramola in Lagos. It's a road that, as you can see, goes to nowhere and is half built, maybe less than half built. So that's the kind of built the response to all of this, and where my presentation is going is the social response, is everything that we're doing in that frankly very challenging context. Though it is a context of exclusion, of criminalization, as I mentioned, it's also a context of increasing confrontation, as I think all of you are seeing in your cities as well, between authorities and organized communities, mass movements. And in this context, we support, as I mentioned in my introduction, a grassroots network of people living in informal settlements called the Nigerian Slum / Informal Settlement Federation. The Federation is a network of people that organize in their communities around community savings groups. within the Slum Dwellers International Network. This is Community Savings Board, regularly meet to share information and strategize and find solutions to challenges that they're facing. Again, an image of a kind of a mass mobilization and protest. So that's what I was going to share around. This is an image of a protest where the urban poor communities that we work with tried to set their, articulate their own urban agenda: livelihood, security of tenure, adequate housing, which are a really important refrain. I hope that wasn't too much context. I'm going to now quickly jump to, I think, what is most interesting, I think, perhaps to all of you, which is, so what to do in this context. And I don't have fancy slides for this part, but you can bear with me and I can share links. What I'm going to share now are two examples of two initiatives that we undertook that were largely around documentation and building voice and speaking and reporting out, that were referred to by Dian. And then at the end, I'll jump to a couple kind of, how do I put it? I guess I'll not use the word provocations. Maybe I'll say, maybe, I don't know if that's true for what I have, maybe some thoughts, some provisional findings, some things that we're struggling with to try to figure out how to effectively respond to. The first of those two efforts was a community-led documentation effort, a community survey. A survey that at the moment of lockdown in early March in Lagos, it was immediately clear that this network of people, myself and all of my colleagues and all the people we work with, for whom in-person mass meetings is a core part of our culture and a core part of our work, suddenly we're unable to do what we always do. And one of the responses to that was basically creating this very diffuse survey effort that was carried out across the city, as you can see in this map on the lower right-hand corner of my screen, in over 144 different informal settlements in some communities by the residents themselves, trying to basically on a weekly basis take stock of the incidents of coronavirus, incidents of government response, be it education campaigns, be it hand washing facilities, be it testing, and also the kind of knock-on impacts of both the virus and the government's interventions on the lives and livelihoods of the people living in these communities. Now, the survey was important for two reasons, and I'll share the reasons and then jump to a few of the findings quite quickly. One, it was a tool for continued communication and networking and checking in, which in the Nigerian context was so essential, where our communal meetings were prohibited, and so there's a thread here that I'll pick up in my final reflections about organizing in the context of COVID and how important, particularly for those of us that live and work in cultures that are very communal. A second reason for this survey that was really important, of course, was that very early in the pandemic, it became clear, as we all expected, what we were hearing from the government and what the international community was hearing about Lagos, and also from mainstream media, was, of course, a very limited view of the reality on ground, a view that, frankly, didn't very much take into account the reality of people living in informal settlements, the urban majority. And so it became very critical at that moment to speak out, to build voice, to actually share a truer picture, or maybe a different side of the true picture of Lagos at that moment, about prevention measures, about community awareness, about the ability of communities of residents of informal settlements to stay home and to protect themselves in this moment. Of course, perhaps unsurprisingly, what we found were very few government interventions, very limited testing, and lockdown measures that were very harsh, that didn't engage very substantively with the realities of the informal economy, and with the realities of, as Anand said, the realities of a more communal or neighborhood scale home, I think, as he put it, which meant that the lockdown measures didn't work very well, or couldn't work very well.
And you have 2 more minutes.
And so, okay, good. Thank you for the heads up. So let me jump finally to the second piece of our documentation work, which was to actually pursue a campaign called Chrono Diaries. Chrono Diaries was a multimedia campaign that where residents of informal settlements themselves captured their own, maybe almost like diaries, but more like recording the realities of their communities. And so this is what you're looking at, is a story map. All of them are audio stories with images that were collected by residents themselves, that just document the progression of the pandemic geographically, and also tell a very different story. I'll share these links so that they can be explored. They're wonderful and powerful stories. If you scroll to the bottom, you start from the beginning of the pandemic and then reach present day. Very, very quickly, with my remaining 1 minute, a few through threads. One that they come out of the community survey, and also this media effort. One is that you can't, perhaps obviously, you can't criminalize yourself to a solution of lack of basic infrastructure and lack of social security nets. The government, was on a campaign of arresting people for not wearing masks, or arresting people for leaving their communities. It simply didn't work, of course, because people needed to eat. The second through thread, of course, is that in order for any sort of intervention to reach informal settlements, it needs to be very tailored to that context. It needs to be very intentional. It can't be a citywide campaign that, because of course, ultimately, people that live in poverty will have a harder time accessing those services, and that's what we witnessed. There was no testing that happened in any informal settlement in Lagos. Must adapt to their vulnerabilities in particular. The third through thread, of course, is that successful interventions by the government or by private actors have to build on the dynamicism of the informal economy, of the realities of the life of the urban poor, and rather than trying to clamp down on it. And we can reflect on ways in which that could be done better. I think there are wonderful examples, including from elsewhere in Nigeria and elsewhere in the world, but unfortunately weren't pursued in Lagos. And then my final bullet point, as I'm sure I'm over time now, is that if any of these efforts are going to be successful, and I'll say this in the context of COVID-19, but also in the broader context of poverty alleviation and building our cities and development more generally, we have to root these efforts in existing social networks and organizing. Otherwise, it just can't reach scale. Otherwise, it will be a square peg in a round hole. Otherwise, you're not taking advantage of the fabric that already exists, that is really quite strong and vibrant, and I think a very fertile ground for building greater resilience in urban poor communities. So I'll leave it at that. I'm going to share links to both the survey and also the page of our Chrono Diaries stories. And I would sincerely encourage everyone to listen through a few of them. They're really brilliant and quite powerful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So it is again also interesting presentation from you and from Lagos. And I think there's a very strong thread from what Anand has been presented earlier, what Anand presented earlier, and what you said just a few minutes ago about how we can challenge the dominant narrative about like verbs or not verbs, vocabularies or understandings towards the poor, which do not really grasp the reality on the ground, right? Like for example, like the campaign of stay at home in order to fight COVID, and then based on what Anand described us, the situation in Hyderabad, also in Lagos, we all I think agree that it is not necessarily addressing what is actually happening in the grassroots or in the ground. So I think it is interesting how we can then speak back or say what or tell our stories, and it will be very interesting to discuss further about the Chrono Diaries and then the effort of Hyderabad Urban Lab to creating new vocabularies and then to challenge the binaries and then the to cross the boundaries, right, of this understanding. So before we go to Witi to listen to Bangkok stories, I would like to I would like to inform what organizer has been trying to inform me for the past 10 minutes. So we have earlier technical problems in terms of the slides and everything, this slide screen. So we would like to address to Chris, our a very kind translator, to put the link of the translation of the Google Docs in the chat box and to open the access to the audience, to the participants, so that the participant can have access to your translation. So that also we can then put the main slide, which is the presentation from the speakers. So Chris, I hope you received my message from the organizers. So we can now proceed to Witi from Bangkok, from Community Architects Network, that also will share us about what the pandemics in Bangkok or in Thailand. Witi, time is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Is my voice clear? Okay, sure. Thank you for having me. I'm still a little confused about what to talk about. Maybe I'm not, I won't be talking directly on the case of Bangkok, but I'll be talking about the situation that is going on in Bangkok and maybe some keys that that we thought it brought us through, but then only several days ago we found that there are another eruption of cases. No? So maybe we need to evaluate the things we have done also. But maybe let me share with you what I've thought about this. No? So with the situation that is happening in Thailand, the numbers rise with, I think, with many Asian cities, and then I think at the end of March, around April, the number has gone down, and from then until last month, I think we considered our country or our cities to be quite safe from COVID situation. And I think we have to thank three things that are key qualities that brought us through that difficulties. I think the first one is the nature of Thai people. I think we are super panic people. And I think we quite share this a lot, but I'm not really sure if we are especially strong in that. So once we heard the news, I think the government stamp the news, reproduce the news again and again, and then people become shocked and panicked. And moms, dad, everyone, grandma, grandpa, we were doing the safest things possible. And I think with that quality, it brought us to it makes the numbers go down pretty well. And people were strict even in the market where we don't expect at the first that they would perform in the way that we asked them to do. Okay. The second thing that we want to thank is that we ourselves are the countries of producer. I'm not sure if I'm using the right word, in the way that many resources we produce ourselves, whether it's food, whether it's materials that we urgently need, medical stuff, the mask we produce ourselves, the alcohol we produce ourselves. So in that situation that happened in the beginning, the shortage of these materials that we urgently need is very short. Like after, I think 4 or 5 weeks, then the supplies are full in the market again. And so everyone are able to grab that. No? And I think the third one I want to thank is the social integrity. And this is quite special. And I think in our Asian countries, we share this quality. The reason I'm saying this is that when the pandemic rise, I try to research back to the situation of polio that erupted in India. And I'm quite curious how they deal with it, because India is not an easy country to work, and there are a lot of, very grounded people. And in the community, it's very dense. How do they work on that? And it's quite similar to what we did in Bangkok. We work through it with social network, not in terms of internet, but the network of people that connect together in the very, very small roots that go into the community level. So with this, I can share one very solid network that are very clear that they perform pretty well in this situation. We call it the social health volunteer. And they are a group of people who could be your auntie, your nanny, uncle, whatever from the communities. Most of them are retired. And so they are having a lot of free time, and they're searching for communities themselves to go in and enjoy with. And these networks are supported by resources from the government, but managed in a community level where they can discuss by themselves in what way they want to work. And they're a group of people who are not work in a city scale, not even district scale. They have network in city scale and district scale. But the key is that the root go down enough that they could reach community scale. And these are respected people because they are auntie in the community, so they can knock on everyone's door and the houses would be open for them. And now that space is open, they can share the knowledge. They can share the awareness with the community people. One of the things that is key here, I think also, is that these social health volunteer, they work closely with local hospital. And so they have basic knowledge about working with health. And so with this network, you can see the materials, the important stuff can go to the community very easily. And this is what I think are the key that brought us through that difficulty. I think maybe I'm talking on behalf of CAN Network now. I think maybe we are working on similar spectrum, and it would be very interesting to join. We work on CAN as a community architects network. We are the network that bridge many teams from different countries with different knowledge to share the resources and the knowledge and experience. And with this, all countries in our network face similar situation, and we are now doing the same thing. We are trying to bridge this, way out methodology, whatever experience you can bring in together. And maybe I can show you one case that will not directly portray the situation, but I think it portrays a way out. And it's not only focusing on the low income, but it's bringing the essence that is needed for social with multiple sector, not only the poor, but how the poor can work with the people who have money. And so let me share with you a short slide. Okay, is my slide up?
Yes, we can see your slide.
Okay, just I will keep the thumbnail on the left, so I will not turn it on like a slide. Okay, so these are the people who I mentioned about. They are social volunteer, and they go in and they talk with people. They're very close, and with this you can have a booth that diagnose people in every district. Okay, and the next case that I want to talk about is the Chiang Mai urban farm. If you know Chiang Mai city, it's the capital of the north of Thailand, and with this city, the economic of the city, 75 and 80% of the economy run by tourism. It's a very touristic place if you have been there. But I'm not talking about money. Money is something that spins the city, and I'm not talking about a big business. I'm talking about street vendors also, talking about small craft shop by the community also. I'm talking about work and labor that were hired by the middle class and the rich also. And so let me go through the slide and then I will explain it through. Okay, so I have around 10 minutes left. So
you have 11 minutes.
Yes, if you see the picture on the foreground, you see a dump site. In the background, you see I'm not sure if I'm using the right word. It's a shrine.
Yeah, cemetery.
Yes, cemetery. Thank you. This is the location of the site. If you see little green area, the center of the city is in the rectangle on the lefty side. So this land was first discovered by a team called Chai Ban, which is an community architect team in Chiang Mai. So when they found the land, they're questioning this situation where poor people become even more difficult. They don't know where to work. They find difficulties buying foods with limited resource. So it shows this very fragile weakness, how to say, ecosystem of life. So instead of being very dependent on the socio-economic structure that we have before, which is based on tourism, can we go directly? Can we bring people closer to food security by themselves? And so the project was initiated with the idea that can we turn a dump site into resources where it's beyond food security, where it's beyond making a garden, but being a project that bridge people together. Okay. This is the dump site you will see, and you will see how it's changed. This is the second phase. This is how it is now. Like if you look at it, it's a big change, and it's not talking about space, but talking about food security and the other things. People come, and it's a project that that belong to the city. It's not a project that belong to any owner or project that belong to the government. People can come in. It's a big event for the city, and people come and grow, put in the big plant, grow in small food. It's become a space for children to come in. I think this is one picture that highlight, that brought us to, that link to this issue. These are minority tribal that migrates into the city. And with this urban farm, we create a program that bridge the buyer and the let me call them the food producer. And these huge tribe, these low-income communities that live alongside this urban farm can be the one who take care of this urban farm, producing food, making sure that the vegetables will grow and it will be a healthy food, where middle class can buy the food supply, where it's even better than the food that you can buy from grocery store. This one is they can be sure that it's safe and you can see it grow. And then it become like a space for people to connect again. And I don't think this is not only an ideal project, but it arises many questions that with the weakness that we have before, but we have been ignored. These situations of COVID-19 help us realize what is important. I mean, what is truly, truly important: food, water, health, shelter, these kind of things. And it makes us question, how can we go through these difficulties and having these important things by our side and not being so dependent on the economic structure. Yeah, I think that's all I will share right now.
Okay. Okay, Vidi, you actually still have 5 more minutes, but we can elaborate further in the discussion sessions. And I think it will be very interesting for me. I'm curious about how the relationship between the government's approach and how and the people's initiative, because if I may not mistaken, I've heard from your earlier presentations that in the earlier minutes that through these distributions of information where people get panicked, but at the same time, I don't know, I presume that through that kind of distributions of information, the governments alert the people and then somehow situated this situation as a very severity issues or the severity of the issues, so the people take the pandemic issue seriously, and so therefore they have somehow initiative. And I would like to know further, maybe in the discussions, how the relationship between these two elements: the people's initiative and the government's response towards pandemics. So after you, then we will have Elisa. So we already assigned Elisa to respond. The three of you, Anand, Andrew, and Witi. And Elisa perhaps also will share a little bit about Jakarta. So Elisa, time is yours.
Thank you, Dian. And again, thank you, Anand, Andrew, and Viti. We are so happy that we can host you here and also share your experience during pandemic time. So again, maybe because we are global South cities, apparently that we have something in common. And I have a grim premonition right now, especially for the urban poor and most vulnerable people. What I'm afraid is before and after the pandemic, for the urban poor and the mostly informal worker, their days actually will come back around as if nothing happened. So kind of like life goes on. Because from what I heard from your presentation, like for example, from Bangkok, you have this big demonstration during the pandemic, and then actually not at that time probably your case is still low, and then but in Jakarta we also face the same difficulties, also big demonstration. I think around 90 cities to protest about the omnibus law, like the biggest changing in the many laws, including agrarian law, housing law, spatial planning law, environmental law, and that make a lot of people angry, especially when they realize the process within the government and the parliament was not a transparent process. But then nothing happened. Just life goes on, as what BTS always said. So, but here what I note from the presentation. So apparently we have a desire to put everything in one space to collect the memory, to collect the space. So that's actually what Andrew did. That also inspired Rujak to also create Corona Diaries. So for Indonesian, you can go to www.bukuhariancorona.org. Dengan coronanya pakai K sesuai dengan bahasa Indonesia. So if for those of you, you can go to www.bukuhariancorona. I can I think one of my staff can write down the website name. So it's also inspired by what happened in Lagos, because it's important to collect the memory, to collect, to remember what it feels during the pandemic. And then because what we believe, it will also create the perception, and also from the perception, we'll also can probably we can use different language and perhaps come out with different reality in the future. So because this is what happened in Jakarta and also in Indonesian big cities. So in the beginning, I think in the like 4 months after the pandemic, so there is a group of civil society called Lapor COVID or Reporting COVID. So they're doing a risk perception survey in Jakarta, Surabaya, and Bogor. So this is scale out of 5. So in Jakarta, we managed to get, I think 150,000 people filling up the survey. And apparently the number is really is not good. You can see that the risk perception is very low. And you can blame it either to the government, or you can blame it on how bad of our memory. Perhaps the last pandemic that we had is just like almost a century ago, when we have also have the flu during the colonial time. We don't have the shared collective memory like Taiwanese people or South Korean or even Vietnamese people during the avian flu, or like Hong Kong people during SARS. So then I don't think anyone aware about what happened during pandemic. But the good thing about being a Jakartan, since we also a city with horrible pollution, air pollution, some people manage to use the mask as a regular basis because they using public transportation. That's the only helpful thing that as a Jakarta people. And then because of our perception is so terrible, and then the perception within the government also terrible as well. But I don't want really to show you how ridiculous our government during the earlier time of the pandemic until today. But I think what my conclusion is, and also reflecting to all of your presentation, especially something that I can relate a lot is what happened in Hyderabad and Lagos. Apparently, I think we know that apparently between the government and the elites, they are running on different timeline, different operation system, and even for them the geography of Indonesia is for them is also different as well. Of course, that also shaped that the reality also different as well. So that's why since the timeline is different, when the informal workers or the feel the struggle during the pandemic, like in the beginning of March, the first staple food aid that sent by the government or late for like 2 months. I kind of like preparing a snippet from Jakarta Post, like from this one, COVID-19 aid stall and used for political stunt. Again, because they're running on the different timeline and also different operation system. And then why they use it for the political stunts? Because we have this the regional election coming on December. And even though there are so many civil society, even regular people demand to be postponed or even cancelled, but they still go ahead. We have 270 local election on December. That include 9 provinces, 224 regions, and then 37 cities. It's include with 100 million people sign up for this election. And even during the election time, according to our election board, official board, they said that the committee within 1,172 voting booths actually infected with COVID-19, but they still come to their job and also operating as usual. So that's how crazy is it, and how it's kind of like related to the previous one, the staple aid, and also it's important to get the control in the cities, because they want to make the government running around and also to push government project, which is always on the different timeline, different agenda from the grassroots or from the local perspective. And then like I think it's a few weeks, and then apparently a lot of people die, including the head of the election region election, the head of city election council. Like for example, this one in South Tangerang, South Sulawesi, East Java, and else. And one thing is interesting, like 3 days before the local election starting, our social affairs minister named suspect as a COVID-19 aid graph case. So he's the one who putting all the publicity stunt coming to poor people, giving out the aid. And apparently, just like 3 days ago, it's kind of like there's another journalism work who also putting up all the puzzle that apparently the social aid is kind of like related to the election. So that's really interesting for me, how the national government or even the party try to get hold for their position in the province and the city, try to get the control over them, but not necessarily try to use it to overcome the pandemic. So, oops, sorry. And Anand sharing about the migrant also remind me of this recent exodus from big cities. So since the government trying to reduce COVID-19 infection, so they kind of 2 days ago they come out with new solution and new prohibition and new regulation. So all passengers traveling for the holiday, they have to take an antibody test. But it's also create like a tremendous problem, long queue like this. So they have to wait a long queue, and then it's not only in Jakarta but also in Surabaya, and also in Denpasar, which is in Bali. It's a popular holiday spot. So for me, it's this. So we basically what happened with this like exodus, they are again on the different reality, but on the similar methodology. They're trying to escape from the pandemic because probably they have a lower perception. It's okay, probably I can get sick, but I will be asymptomatic and etc. But then I will get cured and everything. So and that's starting with this lower perception, risk perception, and then it will lead to another problem. So for Rujak itself, over the past 3 months, Rujak is working together with 12 Indonesian cities to reflect on what happened. What happened in their cities during the pandemic. So we have quite diverse cities. We have four cities. They are part of Greater Jakarta Metropolitan. We have small big island like in Sumatra, in Sulawesi, and in Borneo. We have also 2 biggest cities in Central Java and Yogyakarta. And another, like the second one, is the 3rd biggest city in Indonesia, which is Surabaya. They all come up with different point of view, different and interesting point of view as well. So I guess, of course, a lot of cities, even Jakarta, now trying to come out with solution to go ahead after pandemic. But I really enjoy our session today, and also 3 months conversation with my fellow friends in these 12 cities, and some of them are new friends. So we come out with this not only solidarity, but also feel the same, we are on the same situation. And I think that's one important point to go ahead. Then you have to build the solidarity first, but what happened? Then otherwise you will not, you probably, if you don't have this kind of solidarity, I think we're going to come out with another set of reality. So I give it back to you, Dian. I hope I'm not more than 10 minutes.
No, thank you, Elisa. Actually, you are very punctual this time, only this time. So because you still have 2 more minutes left. Okay, thank you so much for all the speakers, for Anand, Andrew, Witi, and Elisa. And now, so Anand, you already returned with your camera on. Welcome back. So we will have another 30 minutes for discussions. I will invite all the participants to submit your questions and write your questions on the chat box. Later on, the organizer will get it all in the Google Docs, which I can read. But for now, we already have one question from Lukomang Wijayanti, and she basically pointed to Anand and Andrew, but I think Elisa and Witi can also respond to this. First, she said that it is interesting that the conditions in Hyderabad and Lagos are very similar with Jakarta. Andrew mentioned that it will be hard to scale up the initiative without engagement. What kind of engagement that has been done and how to do it? So I will allow now the speakers, the 4 of you, to respond, and then Chris will also help the translation to Indonesia. Maybe you can
Should I
start,
go?
Anand? Yes.
Okay. Let me just quickly say that it shouldn't surprise us that the conditions seem to be similar. That's basically because that by definition we are people who carry the burden of history. We carry the burden of history. We are countries where a very large percentage of our population has always been vulnerable, and that's what defines this thing called the global south. Cities of global south are basically cities where we are constantly bearing the burden of history, of geopolitical realities. Um, the vaccine will come. We don't have a whole lot of say in where and when and how it is going to be distributed. That reminds me actually of a little question that came up a little while earlier about the history of polio vaccine in India, but I'll come to that after a while. Diane, if you have time, just remind me of that question. I'll come to that. What kind of engagement? I think the thing that we are all recognizing is that many of these engagements that we have seen could very well be ephemeral. They might just disappear. We are hearing very different kinds of descriptions of what happened, in the sense that we are hearing, for example, people describing enormous amounts of human courage and dignity. In India, we have seen stories of a 16-year-old girl carrying her father who has a broken leg on a bicycle, cycling about 1,000 kilometers, taking him home. We have seen that kind of courage. We have seen people walking 100 miles just to be able to get a chance to meet the migrant workers who are going home and provide them support. At the same time, we have also seen a lot of greed. We have also seen a lot of ugliness. What is different about this particular moment is that a number of known categories, as I was saying earlier, have been completely shaken up for us. We have also looking at a moment when new technologies have become available for us in ways that we have never seen before, right? So the kind of things that we are seeing from Legos, from Jakarta in terms of producing diaries, these are all things that we have seen in other places as well. What is interesting is how do we conceptualize them? For example, one of the ways and questions that I've been asking myself is this question of when I'm trying to produce an archive, am I trying to hold on to the moment when it affected me very intensely, or am I trying to hold on to the piece, the thing that is objectively captured there, right? And that's a very tricky thing to answer, because how do we hold on to an experience that is already gone? In what ways can we record it? We are also beginning to think about, in the context of so many different vulnerabilities suddenly become visible, are there ways in which we can produce new axes of solidarities, and across what location should we be doing this? And when I was saying that, the old conceptual categories are breaking down, one thing that we have all realized is that you can't really separate politics from economy. And I don't mean this in the bigger structural sense of political economy, right? We are talking about the guy in the neighborhood who has to be able to go in the morning to buy some eggs to be able to make some egg scramble and sell it in the evening. Where is he going to get his money from, right? One thing we have realized, for example, is that in India, a large amount of income in the informal economy comes from weddings. It's unimaginable, right? I mean, it doesn't strike us as a very intuitive thing, but it just so happens that in an economy where big investments are not very easy, not very possible, a lot of the money circulating in cash in local economies happens to be circulating around specific celebrations and observances. And in the last 4 months, which is the winter months, when you have the largest number of weddings happening in our cities, everybody is stuck, right? We don't have people being able to approach beauticians. We don't have people approaching dressmakers. We don't have people who transport people, across short distances in those bajaj vehicles. We don't have chefs getting work. We don't have houses being repainted. Huge amounts of loss that has happened. Now, the thing to think about is, how do we integrate these economies with the micro level politics that need to be now coming together? And in what ways can we use our new technologies to pull that off? And I think that is where we are not stuck, but we also don't have any easy way of making big claims. And that's what I was hearing from Lagos. That's what I'm hearing from Chiang Mai. That's what I'm hearing from Jakarta also, that we don't know. And when we don't know, what do? We need to keep talking. And I think that's one good thing that we are doing, right? That this conversation is so beautiful for the simple reason that we have no clue what needs to be done. And so we are talking, and I think it's a great thing. This is the way to engage.
Okay, Anand. So thank you for your answer. So keep talking. So we will now have Andrew. You already answered earlier, but I will invite you to elaborate further so that we can engage more discussions in this session. Okay, Andrew.
Wonderful. Yeah, and both reflection on the question, but then also reaction to Elisa's presentation and what Anat said about kind of archiving and collecting memory and the utility of such. Directly to the question about engagement, all of us know that engagement is a very kind of messy process, perhaps intentionally messy process that takes a tremendous amount of time and energy and resources to be done well, and that can't necessarily be easily replicated. It isn't a one size fits all or a stamp and you can just do it over and over again. It's more of a commitment to principles about co-production, principles about transparency, and principles about decentralization of resources. And so the point that I made about resources is really that at least in our context, too often when we talk to government or academic partners or others, there's conversation about focus group discussions, or there's conversations about interviews, or these kinds of frankly very, very simplistic and very surface level forms of engagement to inform policy or inform directive. But that if it isn't accompanied with direct dispensation of resources and direct control over kind of the execution of interventions to those communities themselves, to those vulnerable populations, frankly, you can't have the transformative change that I think all of us are seeking to have. You end up replicating power imbalances because inherently they already exist, and the only way to upend those is to really do things differently than we've been doing them for a very long time. So that's what I'll share on that question, particularly on the other point about archiving and kind of collective memory. I think one thing that we explored very much with the Chrono Diaries and was very interesting and revealing for us was two pieces. One, mapping the diaries themselves, because of course there's no there's no one story from the urban poor in Lagos, Nigeria, right? There are hundreds of stories, and those stories are different in hundreds of different ways by according to different ethnic groups, different communities, people that were in transportation sector versus other sectors. So one of the ways in which we engage in those stories was through kind of mapping them, and then you could see a bit of an image of the city in a different way. And then the other piece that I wanted to share that I think is really important that came out in these stories for us is that frankly, too often those of us, and I'll criticize myself here without saying anything about anyone else on this call. Too often those of us in the NGO space or we kind of reinterpret things that we're being told by communities, or we repackage them or something like that. And I think quite often, maybe always, what really needs to happen is we need to get out of the way, and we need to create opportunities for those voices to speak directly. And so the Chrono Diaries that we created, and as any of you will hear immediately if you listen through, there's no narration, there's no, it's the direct voices of people, sharing their own experiences, and those of others of the lockdown and pandemic. And I think that's a key piece of the solution, making sure that there aren't intermediaries kind of shaping narratives and stories, but getting kind of the real honest ones. Probably lots of other reflections too, but those are two that kind of immediately jump to mind. So I'll pause there.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Very interesting thought about the repackaging and reinterpretations of the voices of the grassroots. And I think we can discuss further. I still have also questions for you guys, but I will continue to Elisa and Vicky to respond to the first questions from Lou. Elisa, do you want to say something about the questions? Though it is pointed to Andrew and Anand, but you can, if you have something to say, you can also respond to that.
Oh, okay. Suddenly it's the whole spotlight to your video. Okay. Yes, it's true that it's hard to scale up the initiative without government. So here's the thing. For example, yes, within the urban poor in Jakarta, there's an initiative to buy rice directly from the rural area, which is in Central Java. But then it's if you want to scale up those kind of initiatives, then you need not only infrastructure but also the market. Yes, we can probably imitate what government did, but during crisis time like this, when everyone is so preoccupied with their problem, and then everyone also have different set priority. Everyone also asking for aid, food, and money, and sometimes that quite difficult to put those to scale up those kind of initiatives. I don't have any answer for that actually, because when Reject try to help urban poor community in one in big fisher folk village in North Jakarta, then it's quite difficult to scale up, to move it to transfer it to other neighborhoods, because again that's the constraint. The crisis time also open up some door, but also closing up some doors as well, especially for the important one. We thought that if we thought as a civil society, Andrew also give a very good point, that sometimes in civil society have this kind of belief that probably we can use this something and then put it as an urgent thing to government or to donors or to people to provide charity, but then apparently no on that case. But there is one case, by the time if you have a government also agreeing with you, that and or not only agreeing with you but also somehow connect. There's one initiative by Jakarta government. They try to use mapping. They try to use and also try to connect people with quite nice sophisticated GIS online map. but at the same time, they also connecting with the people on the ground, and they distribute the aid and also cell phone for the online learning, and also support for the informal workers. So the government is on the helping from to reach out with the big companies and etc. While they also opening up to small organizations, small grassroots organization, or even connected to small neighborhood as well within Jakarta region. So that's if you so I think that's one big important case for pandemic situation. But then again, if you want to scale up, apparently, then you still need the government at the end of the day. Yeah.
So we do still need the government. We do still need the state. Is it? Okay. Witi, do you want to respond to Nilu questions? Nilu Komang, I'm sorry.
Yes. I think it's a very complex issue and it's very difficult talking about it. But from my experience working through cases in Thailand and working with the Community Architects Network, I think we agreed on something that, okay, yes, the support and the aid from the government, structural aid, is very important, but it's also very important for us people who work with them to allow people to find their own answers. I'm talking about the small cells that already have their own answers. You know, a lot of time we are when the pandemic erupted in Thailand, you know, it shocked people for a while, and after 4 weeks or 5 weeks without knowing when it will end, then the working class, the low income people, they start talking about, if they're in Bangkok, they start talking about going back to their hometown. And many is involved going back and do the farming, doing and living the life that they know how to live without depending on the structure. I talk a lot with friends, and it's very interesting that you know people who live with their buffaloes next to the forest, have their own banana trees. Their life is not as difficult as the poor who is dependent on the system. And therefore, I think this might be the. I'm not sure if it's the key to scale it up. It's good to scale it up, but I think we should also look into other alternatives organically, allowing, or if us talking about us working, people who work with the marginalized, then maybe our role is to help them find the answers that were hidden, that are already inside them. Yeah, I don't know if that could be the answer, but that's my response.
Yeah, thank you, Witi. I think it has extended the provocations that we had already earlier from Anand until you recently. So I will continue to the second questions. It's from Umar Al Farouk. So it's quite long questions, but he basically addressed all of you to respond to the question. He said that there have been key social movements as of late in all the countries we're discussing today. We have omnibus law protest in Indonesia. We have NSARS movement in Nigeria. We have farmer strikes in India, pro-democracy protests in Thailand. But this movement seems to be limited along national boundaries. This is despite that the demands of the movements have many similar elements, socioeconomic justice, equity, emancipation, etc. In your opinion, how can these national, subaltern, or working class movements be more internationalist? And then he believed that forums such as we have today are important in connecting middle class, educate intellectuals. But what do you think it is needed to amplify working class voices or these movements? Because we earlier talks about how to scale up in probably in local and national scale, but this question's more on the how to we also can scale up in the international level. Okay, who would like to start to answer these questions or provocations? how about I address to Andrew first, and then Anand, Viti, and Elisa.
That's a very
Wonderful.
big provocation. Everybody is backing off.
Anna, would you like to go first?
I can. I mean, I don't think that any of us will have a satisfactory answer to that question. But I'll try and say a few things. Um, I think the most important thing to recognize is that national level struggles, um, national working class itself is a bit of a strange entity in the sense that what represents the nation state in many of these places, and what takes on the nation state in many of these places are actually not national in the sense of being truly expansive to cover the entire territory. They are actually fractions of different social groups that are fighting against each other for some kind of a hegemony. I think a lot of these fights, and this is one of the things that characterizes the global south, are actually fighting for dominance rather than for hegemony. They are not even trying to make their worldview become largely acceptable to a large number of people. It is about dominating turf, and that is why we actually see that a lot of these struggles involve fair amount of struggle and coercion and so on and so forth. I think these are things that we need to recognize, and we need to think about how to deal with them within those national contexts, push them to the point where the nation state framework is no longer really adequate even to deal with this. And I'm saying this because many of the struggles that we are seeing now, in the form of, let's say, the farmers struggle at the national scale. If you look at the regional variation in the kinds of things that farmers want, it's mind blowing, enormously diverse range of concerns, and they're all bringing them together in the name of a national farmers' voice, and that's where the politics actually lies. It actually doesn't have much to do with agriculture in itself. It's many other things. The second thing that I think is important to keep in mind is the story that we are hearing from Chiang Mai, and I think that's a very important thread that we have heard in many things that we have said, which is that, to me, one of the most amazing things that we have seen in these last 8 months is the true resilience of local communities, of individuals, of volunteerism, of something which says that, look, the state is not capable of dealing with this, and we can't really afford to even spend time demanding this from the state, because we're just going to lose a lot of time. We'll have to figure out how to deal with this by ourselves. And I think that's a very important spirit. Now, is this spirit a class spirit? Is this something which can be internationalized in any way? Is this something which actually bypasses the question of national and international? I don't know yet. I don't know how to think about it. All I know is that I'm seeing a lot of possibilities in this moment when people are in some ways reaffirming or sometimes discovering completely in new contexts, where they're saying that we need to come together in formations, we need to come together in elements along axis that will allow us to live this current moment in some kind of peace. And I think that's a very important shift that is happening. What do we do with that? How can we take it forward? I don't know yet. I do think that, um, like I was saying in response to the previous question, and this is the reason why I find these archives so very important, is that when you go right down to the bone and you see the rawness of that experience and say that this is what I want to hold on to for a moment, when you say that this is the kind of bare bones elements of living with oneself, with others, with whatever is allowed here, I think it's something that we need to be patient with, let it speak, and the way to deal with that is to um, have a lot more of these kinds of conversations. We really need to bring forward those direct recordings of those experiences and think about them, reflect on them, and from within that, some kind of new answers will emerge. So I wouldn't prejudge this moment as a failure of national struggles to surpass the nation and become international. It that's too depressing for me to think about it like that. Yep, that's
Okay, thank you, Anand. So we have to keep working on this through resilience and not really or occupy ourselves with the idea whether we can manage to make it international. I think we have a lot of homework to even start with this and to maintain this resilience using the moments of this pandemic. Okay, Andrew, do you want to continue what Anand has again provoked us?
Yeah. That was really, I think, a really good framework, and I certainly begin by saying I don't have a perfect answer to that question either. Maybe I'll share kind of two lessons or two characteristics of the NSARS movement that I think were quite effective. Whether these could be, internationalized or kind of vectors for greater mobilization and exchange and connection across borders, I don't know. But there have been many social movements in Nigeria over the years. One thing that characterized NSARS that was hugely impactful was that it didn't have a single leader. And the reason why that was so singularly important is that in Nigeria there's a long tradition of the government, figuring out who the leader of a particular protest is, or figuring out who the leader of a particular movement is, and singling them out and arresting them or disappearing them or otherwise compromising them. And instead, what you saw with the NSARS movement was there was a moment. There was several cries for justice around very highly publicized cases of police brutality that galvanized people from across Lagos, across different cities in Nigeria, to basically take to the streets. And initially, they didn't have one set of demands, but over the course of a week, 2 weeks, into the third week, there was a collective process of articulating what those demands were. And so it wasn't a single civil society movement or coalition. It wasn't built on the traditional framework of, hierarchies. It was truly spontaneous in that way. And that was hugely powerful. And I think that there are lessons of, similar lessons from other kind of movements. It was tremendously impactful as well. Basically closing down cities in Nigeria. The government, in no time in the last decade that I've been living and working in Nigeria, has so quickly acceded to the demands of a popular movement as they did. Now, whether they get fully implemented, that's a somewhat separate question, but really came to the fore and said, like, we accept these, we have made mistakes, these injustices have to be righted, and like, this is what, we're going to put money on the table and make this right. And so that was really powerful. Whether one of the weaknesses of the NSARS movement that I think, again, there might be a lesson both in the successes and in the weaknesses, for more kind of international solidarity, was that it didn't fully cut across class lines. Actually, it was a predominantly middle upper class mobilization in Nigeria. Of course, there was kind of sentiments of solidarity, but in terms of the people that were on the front lines, very unlike past protest movements in Nigeria. this was led by young professionals, and for that reason, of course, social media played a huge role. People were live streaming on Instagram, and things that the communities that I work with, frankly, aren't as prevalent, aren't as on and in those spaces and using those tools. So I think there's a lesson there as well about how to sustain a movement by making sure it cuts across different lines.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Viti, do you want to respond also?
Can I be a little honest? I'm quite confused. Like, I think it's very complex. Can someone try to help me shorten it a bit, and maybe what's at the heart of the questions?
So if I understood the question correctly, I think the question would like to ask whether how we could scale up the movements that has been going on in for different cities, including the protest action, the protest movements in Thailand, into international level. So how we can, for example, like network among these movements, or how to scale up the movement. So it's not only within the national boundaries.
Yeah. On how, I'm not very sure. On why, I'm not very sure. But I would think it would be very, very interesting, taking the experience from Can when we, each country have been through different experiences, and that we developed methodology in each countries, in each parade. And I think it's getting more and more difficult for us, one person, to say how it would happen, because I think like Andrew said, I really agree that the quality of these movements these days, it's very organic, and it goes and it spread very quickly. You can, it happened in Thailand that you plan a protest, and you said you put the flag that there'll be protest at the end of this street here. From the morning, the news spread so fast, and we said people will gather at 6 p.m. And then at 4:30, when the government set out every bunker and all the police and the soldier were there, we said, it's a lie, we are just kidding. And so protest, no one came. It was 4 children running in that area. It was so organic. It was an art. I don't know. And so it's become more and more difficult for people to say how. But I think with the creativity, with the organic quality, and with us learning from each other become the mainstream than learning from the book, where you learn strategies, how to fight, how to protest on something. I think it's on its way now. It's on its way, and soon we'll be very connected. Yeah, that's all the reply that I have for now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Viti. I think that's a very a good provocation, because I probably know what Elisa would like to say, and you already lead her to that kind of response. You go ahead, Elisa.
Yeah, actually, the class movement is not. I think we agree that the class movement is not only about the protest that you mentioned here. The protest here probably something that only kind of like 1% of the real hard work that conducted by the people who support the movement. So for Rujak case, I don't know the answer, but we always have two belief actually, since the beginning of our inception, like 11 years ago. We always connecting people and all kind of organization. So that's why we have this event. So I don't know what happened after this. I don't know, perhaps Anand will contact Andrew or Viti. Oh, we already connected already, Viti, because we can't always work together with many Indonesian architects, community architects, for example. And then we also co-produce knowledge together with not only within national level, but sometimes on the regional level. Even me and Anand have this monthly meeting with the Global South urbanists or scholars. So I guess that's also a very good way to connect as well. The know-how is always not coming from the protest. Sometimes we inspire each other. I think Bangkok people also got inspiration from the Hong Kong people on how to do effective protests, and that's also what happened in Jakarta. It's not only about protest, but how you use a specific vehicle like arts. Even how you try to disrupt the government in different way. And probably we can also learn something learned from Lagos and Hyderabad as well. So that's what my organization believes. So I hope that this event also inspiring you on this for this class movement from here and for the future. Okay, that's also okay. Come back to you, Dian.
Okay, thank you, Elisa. I think what Elisa just said already a statement of the organization as a host, but also the hope of that we can have the ongoing or to continue what we have today, because Anand said that if we cannot find the answer now, at least we can keep talking and then keep discussing it and then try to together to find out the answers. And we still actually have 2 more questions, but unfortunately we will have the second webinar around 6:30, and then me and Chris will still work as moderator and translator for the second webinar. So we will sorry that we have to close this discussions right for now. But for the questions that are already addressed, I've already seen the questions to Anand and other speakers. We will give it to Anand, and Anand will respond, and somehow we will send the answers to the persons, to the participant that asked question. I'm sorry, Anand, because we only have another 20 minutes for the second webinar. It's actually
we are all very committed to keeping the conversation going, so we will respond.
Yeah, we will have Abdul Malik Simon and Marco Kusmawijaya from Rujak. So you are invited to stay or not stay. To return for another 25 or 20 minutes. So let me and Chris have a break to go to the restroom for a bit, and then continue to the second webinar or discussion. So on behalf of the organizer, I would like to express my gratitude for the speakers today, to Anand, Andrew, Witi, and also to Elisa, and also to the participants, to the organizer that has somehow managed to spend the last 2 hours in a very productive way. I have so many keywords and I don't want to try to conclude what we have today. I think it is very rich discussions, and there are so many thought-provoking questions that we should, I think, follow up either through discussion or, I don't know, writing or any type of co-productions of knowledge. So thank you so much. We will see soon. Please join us for the second webinar titled The Pandemic, Southern Urbanism and Collective Life with Abdul Malik Simon and Marco Kusmawijaya. So thank you so much again, Anand, Andrew.
Thank you.
Elisa, thank you so much.
Great to see you.
For Andrew, have a nice sleep. It's already 4 a.m. 6 a.m. in the morning. Okay. Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.